We're now going to enter into a time of discussion on our panel, and I would like to invite Rabbi Galia Rooks to join us for the rest of our conversation. Rabbi Rooks is a rabbi emerita of the temple in Louisville, where she served for 30 years.
So I think that we're seeing this call throughout the ages, cross-culturally, cross-religiously, but who is the other? And is that not the most important story that we tell, our story as human beings, of children of the divine, of the stewards of this beautiful planet that we are currently doing our best to destroy? There is a little bit of that if you look for it. I'll give one example. In the quintessential Jewish story of the Exodus from Egypt, so we were slaves and we go free after the 10 plagues and we get to the Red Sea is in front of us, and Pharaoh, who of course has changed his mind and sent his soldiers after us. So the chariots are behind us, the Red Sea is in front of us, and with a miracle, God parts the waters, and we march across. When the last Israelite gets to the other side in safety, the waters close down, and there is a midrash. Midrash is great. It's stories about stories in the Bible. That's my favorite thing. And in the midrash, it says that the angels are rejoicing in heaven, and God silences them and says, "How can you sing? How can you dance? Those are my children who are drowning in the sea." And there are other examples of that. And I thought that maybe that some of our speakers would be willing to maybe share an idea of places in your tradition where peek behind the curtain and walk in someone else's shoes and see what that feels like. Is that something that resonates with anyone here who would like to share?
Well, I've actually written about Jonah in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's a canonical prophetic text in all three traditions. And Jonah is a very reluctant prophet who, as we find in the Hebrew Bible, does not want to preach forgiveness to the Ninevites. And so even after he sees obvious signs of their conversion, their repentance, he sits at the edge of the city to wait for the 40 days to pass, hoping that God will in fact punish them. Mm-hmm. And then when God doesn't, he gets very angry, right? And the story ends very abruptly, but basically, the gist of it is, I gave life. God tells Jonah, I gave life to all those people and all those animals. And why shouldn't we rejoice that they're living instead of dead?
Right, and the story is that he's out in the desert and a gourd grows up and gives him shade, and then the next morning God sends a worm to destroy the gourd, and Nineveh is so upset, and God says, Nineveh is so upset, Jonah is so upset, and God says, you're upset about the gourd, that one plant that you didn't plant the seed, create it, water it, till it, care for it, and you're upset that one plant died. What about all my children? And these are all such eye-opening stories. It's like, oh yeah, right. It's not all about me. Judith,
Others? The Shantideva in the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism talks about the importance of exchanging the self for the other. That is, the foundation of compassion practice is beginning to realize that in many ways, the suffering of others is much more important than our own, and that our own suffering is something we've learned to deal with and work with. But for so many people, the only thing that we can really do to help is to place their suffering as more important than our own, and to literally practice breathing in their suffering and extending our own well-being to them. So the focus, particularly of the 8th chapter of Shantideva, is on how we begin to recognize that our suffering is not just our own, and that for others, because it's such a burning thing, and they have not necessarily the tools and the ways of working with suffering, that it's important to extend oneself to the other in that way. So this is the backbone of the Mahayana tradition, and Shantideva was an 8th century Indian saint who his teachings have been incredibly important throughout the Buddhist world.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are stories, Rabbi, but I think I just want to, instead of narrating a long story, to just affirm what Judith said. In the Hindu tradition, the one who knows God, the one who is liberated, is consistently described as the person who embraces the suffering and the joy of others as his or her own suffering and joy, and then works actively to alleviate that suffering. The texts that describe such a person, those texts do not limit the other whose joy and suffering you identify with. It's a very inclusive description, the joy and suffering of the other.
And that story you told us about Krishna, that as soon as you think that you're the only one Krishna is dancing with, poof.
It's a fascinating part of the story. It's this big circle of dance.
But our interdependence.
Yes.
And I think that's something that Louisville tries to be really good at. You know, here's a COVID thing. I stopped wearing a watch. I have no idea what time it is.
Oh, right in front of you.
Oh, it's 8 o'clock? No. We have 8 minutes left.
Yes.
Thank you. It says 8 o'clock. I just want to put in a plug for Louisville, which created the Festival of Faiths all these years ago. And is this the 26th? Is that where we are? Hard to believe. There are interfaith roots in Louisville that people don't even know about. Those of you who are here, if you're from Louisville, how many of you have heard of the Hunger Walk? Okay, and that was created as an interfaith effort between a rabbi, a priest, and a minister. Walked into a, no. But there was a child who starved to death and was freezing under a bridge in Louisville one night, and all the faith leaders got together and said, not in our city. And when the River Road Mosque, the Islamic Center for Compassion, I'm missing something there. I still think of it as the River Road Mosque, just a few years ago was desecrated with graffiti. The entire city came out. There were literally thousands of people. I was talking to Dr. Muhammad Babar, who's a great Muslim leader in our community and the head of Muslim Americans for Compassion. And he said that if everyone who came who wanted to paint got one postage stamp size place to paint, they could have repainted the entire mosque. And it's, you know, the mayor came down and all the faiths were represented when there was a threat against the Jewish community, when the temple, not the Hindu temple, here in town. Here in town. What was it? It was the Hindu temple. No wonder I can't think of what it was besides the Hindu temple. And someone broke in and stabbed a knife in a chair and did, you know, damage and stuff. And the whole community came out. I just recently heard, and this was pre-COVID, so I don't know how long ago it was, not that long. And I just recently heard that one group sent flowers every day for weeks and weeks and weeks, and now on the anniversary of when that happened, they send flowers, just as a sign of love and support. And certainly, Louisville is not perfect. We have a long way to go in race relations and all the rest of it.
I love these local examples because I feel as though they get to why do we even share our sacred stories with one another? Why do we bother to make relationship across difference? And not only is our personal storytelling an act of resilience when we choose to tell our stories again and again, but then when we share them, we weave this fabric together. And I am just looking at our time and would love to invite us into a closing reflection together. For each of the panelists and for you, Rabbi Rooks, to answer for us, how does this sharing of sacred stories contribute to our flourishing? Does all of this matter? And for each of us to end with a closing remark on that question.
I'll begin since I was first, and in some ways, and I'll keep it very brief because we have 4 minutes left, which has to include also 3 minutes of silence. Is that right?
We will move
so
beyond
perhaps
time.
The 3 minutes of silence. Anyway, what matters, and the reason why these sacred stories really work is from what I receive from my own tradition is the importance of not just trying to create some pie in the sky kind of story for the future, which some activists are wanting to do, but to really recognize and be realistic about the circumstances in which we are, and recognize that our shared anguish about the state of the world is a sign of our fundamental wholeness and goodness and instinct for healing. And as we acknowledge that instinct for healing, we already begin to surface the story that we can create together for shared flourishing. But it begins with some collective acknowledgement, individual acknowledgement, and collective acknowledgement that it is really a rough, rough time. And our vision is coming out of something so fundamental in our instinct for wholeness, instinct for healing that is there, which in my tradition we call basic goodness or Buddha nature, which is already envisioning a future together. So maybe we'll go in the order of presentation and...
Sure. Megan, a short answer to a very beautiful
big question.
And as human beings, as a human being, I need other human beings to be human. I cannot be human outside of a community of human beings. In a similar way, I think that our traditions need each other to be more fully our traditions. I have experienced this personally, and this is why my pilgrimage, in addition to trying to get deeper and deeper into my own tradition, has been a pilgrimage of openness and learning from other religious traditions, because I've discovered that I need the wisdom, I need the friendship of my neighbors of other faiths to discover my own tradition more fully, but also to expand my spiritual vision. We often think of or represent our traditions as having no need for other traditions, as having a self-sufficiency that makes other traditions, we are indifferent to other traditions. Other traditions are redundant. We can be ourselves without the other. I think we have to challenge that viewpoint. And the only way to challenge it is really by engagement, listening to the stories of others. We have heard our stories. We are, to some extent, we are very familiar with our own stories. We need to open up our hearts and minds to the stories of others. And to love others, to care for others, to be compassionate to others, we have to know them. to love another requires knowing the other. And I think this is why hearing the stories of the other, contemplating those stories are necessary for our mutual flourishing.
Thank you. Ruben?
Older I get, the more attractive the mystical theologians become. And I become increasingly frustrated in my inability to relate to my Gen Z students. And yet we found a common bond in this almost despair and hopelessness about politics, about environmental degradation. And I'm beginning to realize that if we're going to find some common ground, it's going to be through story, but not just story as something we all enjoy, or even something that educates, but what makes, to me, stories, sacred stories, is its transformation. And so if we're going to rediscover hope, it's going to be through something beyond ourselves breaking into this world and guiding us into a better future.
Thank you.
And it's not that hard. I mean, I had never met any of the people on the stage before this afternoon, and we sat around in the green room and we showed each other pictures of our kids and our grandkids, and we told stories about where we were born. And I mean, I think that the fear of other religions or other races or other beliefs it's just ignorance. And people say to me, isn't it hard doing all that interfaith work? And I don't think it's hard at all. I think it's glorious. I think it's inspirational, what we learn from other people. I'm just going to end with one sentence to Judith. You were saying about what should come first, justice or peace. And our tradition says, Marbet Torah, that's the first half of the sentence. Marbet Tzedakah, Marbet Shalom. Increasing justice increases peace. And they are integrally related.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our amazing speakers today.